Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the D-League, episode 14. This week we are going to start our genre weeks. For the following weeks we are going to, or Bilal and I, we are going to talk about a different gaming genre. For example, RTS, so strategy, real-time strategy games, first-person shooters, racing games, etc. And the basic theme is to give you guys a short introduction about the genre. Then we are going to talk about the different experience as a player and as a developer of a game for that genre. And then in the end, we are going to give you a few examples of games in that genre for better or worse, so you guys actually know what games did right and what some games did wrong, and the reason why they were not that popular in the end. And so today we are going to start with real-time strategy games. So this is going to be our first genre Bilal and I are going to talk about. And so what is real-time strategy? It's pretty much third-person view game where you control units or bases. Some games might have production, or, well, that's pretty much the classic RTS game, where you have buildings that construct units that you control. And then in single-player mode, mostly you have missions or campaigns where you have specific targets, while in a multiplayer setting, most of the time the target is to destroy the opponent or make him or her surrender. So that's pretty much the basic game aspect. You got a base, you need to mine resources, you build units and further buildings, and it's kind of like a war game that you try to win, and just a bit more complex. It's just not just mining resources and building buildings. You can vary your strategies. I mean, that's in the genre title, of course, right? So also, like on if you have played like tabletop games, then you have different maps or different structures, how the game is structured. So of course the gameplay differs from game to game and also from map to map in that game. Is there anything that you want to add, Bilal? Or
No, I guess to kind of summarize it, I mean, because there are often times you can see the genre will, like, some games will have a stretch and say that this game is an RTS, but you don't really think of it as an RTS. And I think what's interesting about a genre is, like, you can kind of push it to the boundaries and say, well, technically this game is like an RTS or an FPS, but it's not a classic kind of game, so it's just weird to call it that, and maybe it's its own like kind of genre. So I think, I mean, for me, I find any RTS game is typically something where you have resource management and like army management. So like you have the ability to use resources to make your army basically stop the other guy's operation. And I mean, like, that's as basic as I can think of an RTS definition, right? Because I mean, there was one game called Boyd, and I don't want to get too much into examples right now, but there was one game called Boyd that's labeled as an RTS, and it's kind of just your units automatically move, but you just have to capture like certain things, and the resources are basically like how many things do you have captured, and the army is like this automatic attacking thing. So I mean, like, yeah. So I guess the genre can kind of be vague in that regard, but yeah, there are classics like you said where you build buildings and build units and fight with armies. Yeah.
I guess the main thing is that, like, real-time strategy actually says, is that units move while you are giving commands. So if you tell a unit to move, then after you give the command, it moves, while everything else in the game actually moves at the same time. So it's not like time has stopped and you give commands and then it continues. That would be turn-based strategy, which we are going to talk about in a different episode later on. So now that we gave a short introduction on real-time strategy games and you hopefully understood the basic concept of the genre, let's continue with our experiences as players and as developers of games in that genre. So I would suggest we talk about players first, because I think as a developer, you're mostly thinking about the experience that a player is going to have in the end, and
yeah, hopefully.
So for yeah, so as a player in a real-time strategy game, of course, if you just play single-player missions, then you probably play for the story, and it's probably not too challenging, so that everyone can actually complete the campaign. So some missions might be challenging, but in the end, everyone should be able to finish, or maybe you can select difficulty levels. So, like, as a player that likes single player missions and campaigns, then you are probably expecting a thrilling story or fun missions. Like if every mission was just search for enemy base and destroy everything for 30 levels in a row, then it would be kind of boring. So from my perspective, I would suggest I would expect to have also something like rescue missions, or maybe something like spy missions where you control one or two spy units to maybe steal some technology or blow something up. So in that case, you don't just have a base and build stuff and then just stomp the computer. So that as a player, it's actually kind of varying style of missions. I guess else it's really stale, and you if you have like sequences, like videos between the missions, then yeah, it would be probably just like, oh yeah, you defeated the enemy, great, now defeat the enemy base in like sector B or something. And that wouldn't be very exciting. At least like games, older RTS games often had this destroy enemy base missions, like those made up maybe 80% or like 85% of the missions, and then yeah, it kind of gets really stale. Of course, they introduce you to more and more units from mission to mission, but yeah, it's not that exciting, especially if the mission design, like the map design, is really frustrating. Then you just want to get it over with instead of enjoying playing the game.
Yeah, I found that whenever playing any RTS like mission, actually I don't like most RTS single players. I should say that, like, to begin with. Like I found a lot of them to kind of be boring. But I think in general, like the main like reason why they're ever boring is when it's just another match, because if I play a campaign, I usually kind of expect some sort of like how should I describe it? either progression or like a linear story or like an RPG like story. Whereas like sometimes an RTS like campaign or story mode or single player mode is just going to be like a bunch of skirmishes one after the other. And maybe it's like not exactly a skirmish, but it'll still feel like it in a way where it gives you a starting point and then you just have a base. And then the enemy
Hmm.
team, like maybe the enemy team will just keep sending units, and or there'll be multiple enemy bases or something like that. And those can be really boring just because, well, for one, me as a player, like playing against bots just feels kind of silly because I mean bots are always so far bad, except for those Elon Musk bots in Dota. But but in general, it's like bots in games have just been bad. They're not something to compete against. So if you're playing something like a skirmish, but just a lot of times it's
Hmm.
not really that fun for a competitive player. Um,
Hmm.
but but I think in general, if you're just doing a bunch of skirmishes, like that's kind of a stale gameplay because a campaign, like the special part about a campaign is that there's something to it that isn't just playing a skirmish. I think, at least in my opinion, it can be that, but like it feels very boring because you're kind of doing the same
Yeah.
thing over and over again. Um,
Yeah, I think so as well.
yeah, and I mean,
I yeah, sorry.
yeah, I was just gonna
Go
say,
ahead.
I think the objectives and like your resources like need to vary a lot between each mission to actually kind of
Hmm.
get that like experience that you're going somewhere or doing something like, or maybe like what if, like the campaign story might have some goal that the characters are trying to reach, and there should like, you should feel like you're actually trying to reach that goal rather than just having units like copy pasted into like
Yeah.
sections of the map, or just build a base and then kill that thing, and then then in the story they pretend something different happened, etc. So
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, I totally agree. Um, as a player, I would expect like if I play the story or the campaigns of the game to actually learn something to learn something about the story of the game, like the background, like the setting for the different factions and what makes them special. To like then even if you have several skirmish missions, then at least you have some story progression or you learn more about why this faction actually behaves like that or where maybe uh, different units come from. Like, yeah, that's actually stolen technology
Mhm.
from a different faction, and so it looks similar, but yeah, it was kind of adapted. And then, yeah, when you use it in multiplayer, then you're already or you think, yeah, that's it, that unit, and maybe that's fun to use because it was stolen from like in the story
Mhm.
from the other faction or also I think like single player is a good thing to introduce uh to get introduced to like how the game works because you won't throw the player right into like a real battle. You want to start from like nothing. So at least I would expect like four or five missions where they just explain like, yeah, this is how you mine resources and how to build buildings and how units move and attack and maybe special abilities or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
as a player, I think the best experiences, like you might not add any thought to like why a game is actually fun. Like, and I think most players actually wouldn't question why is this game so fun or why do I play this game so much. I think most players actually will kind of just play it and have a good time at it, and not really care too much like why it's so fun, because obviously you're playing it to have fun, not to be inquisitive. But I think like you can often overlook as a player like what's actually fun about something, and like one concept that really seems to make fun like games like stay fun and keep players playing is not just progression, but kind of the idea that um, kind of teaching the player like through interesting experiences, and it's kind of like building a puzzle, where like you don't want the player to learn this concept by like forcing them to use it, but like let's say you play a side mission, like for example in StarCraft 2, you could play side missions as in Heart of the Swarm to get different units, and in Machines like it wasn't technically a side mission, but there was like the gorilla mission where like you were supposed to learn how to use the gorillas and whatnot. Um, and so I think like one thing that's pretty cool is like teaching like through kind of this elaborate setup or design of a mission, is having the player like get a unit, and then you'll tell them like, oh, this unit can do that, and so it's pretty good to use it in this way, and so they'll kind of try it in that way and explore it and see, oh well, that unit's pretty good. And so in that way, like a campaign can prime you for like even like beginning like multiplayer or beginning skirmishes and like getting better at the game. And it's just like fun when you learn how to use like a new concept, because you're like, well, now I'm even more flexible and better at the game, so I can do more stuff.
Hmm.
Because yeah, I think people in general enjoy progressing, whether it's in life or in a video game or anything.
Hmm.
So that's just something that's pretty cool to see as a player and a developer, actually, because as a developer you have to think, well, what would keep the player playing, and it's stuff like that that can do that. So
Yeah. Um. All right. So I guess we kind of move into the multiplayer area now, because I took some notes on how RTS can be seen as boring. They kind of impact the single player as well. So I guess it's also something in general, um, like all units feeling the same, or the factions being too similar, the gameplay being too slow, units not reacting quickly, and the game being too imbalanced. So I guess all units feeling the same and factions feeling similar um, is something you won't see in RTS much today anymore. But because I guess developers just learned that yeah, that's not what people enjoy playing. Because just imagine you have faction A and they have a buggy that shoots with a machine gun, and then you have faction B with a motorbike that also shoots a machine gun, and maybe the one is like the bike is a bit cheaper.
They're different stats, yeah.
But yeah, so it's a bit cheaper, but and does less damage, and maybe it's not even faster. So in that case, it would, like, in the end, if you build units for 1,000 resources, then they might be the same strength or something. So that will be boring, because then you have like there's no difference in picking faction A or faction B. Just the design is a bit different. Of course, in that case, the game wouldn't be too imbalanced, but really boring to play, because yeah, it's just it's like playing a strategy game with just one faction, kind of.
Yeah, on that note, I think like sometimes the units, like, they won't even have the same design, but they'll feel kind of as if they're the same, because they don't seem to have too much of a different effect on armies unless you're very good at the game. There's this game called Ashes of the Singularity that's new. It's almost the newest RTS right now, actually, I think, and it's a bit older than some other ones, but it's like once you play the game and get better at it, it's more fun. But when you start, you kind of build different units, and their projectiles are similar, and like the fights kind of like seem to play out the same, and like the units didn't really feel too different, because they're kind of small. You build tons of them, they're expendable, and they basically just deal damage. But I mean, like once you get like better at it, you can see. Well, for example, there's a Zeus unit where it shoots like electricity chains, and that's kind of the AOE small unit killer. Whereas like there are some other units that are more directed towards destroying one large unit. Um,
Hmm.
and I mean that was kind of the majority of the differentiation from the ground units is like some different stats, but also just these ones kill AOE, these ones kill um, single like dreadnoughts basically. And I mean I'm not sure how I feel about the game. I think it was pretty fun, but I don't think it was that creative in terms of like unit design. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, they could kind of not feel too different, but I don't know if I should say that because you can find the differences between each other. I think it's more of like it appears that way if you're new, and that can kind of like be off-putting. I think to new players, at least to me, it was kind of off-putting. Um, but yeah, I think it's really important to like have to make the units differences really clear
Hmm.
and like make them pretty separate because it just makes the game look and feel more interesting. I think because when the units are
Yeah.
when the units are similar, it's like uh, they're interesting, but they're too close. So then you're like, all right, well, I feel like I'm building the same thing. So
Yeah, you
yeah,
you have like the same unit but with a different weapon and maybe a
yeah,
bit bigger or
hmm
smaller in that case.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree. I think that's not very exciting as a player because you might think, oh, now I can build a new unit, yeah, and let's see what it can do, and then yeah, it just looks bigger, and maybe instead of shooting a laser, it just shoots electricity, and then you're like, yeah, okay, that's boring.
yeah, yeah. That's actually what I found. That's what I found a lot interesting about ability. I mean, like old RTS games didn't have as many abilities as like I think the new ones. Except I mean, like StarCraft is an exception. And actually, I haven't really played any of the old Command and Conquers, but I felt that like a lot of the older RTS games seem to have a more like classic approach of just different stats. But I
Hmm.
think with different abilities, like if a unit has abilities that you can cast with like cooldowns and things that can actually like really add some differentiation to it. Like, but if the game is a huge scale, that's pretty difficult to add in without like without making the player have too little control over it. But I think like in a smaller scale RTS, like I think that can be a pretty interesting thing to have is like the abilities so that they kind of have like an edge that's based on
Hmm.
some player skill rather than just getting the correct macro resource control and army control.
Yeah.
Because it kind of adds like if one player is ahead, then if you can outplay the other guy to get like back into the game, then that's like a really cool aspect because it's not just a linear. This guy got the first second this guy got like the first natural or something like that, for example. Like say there's an RTS where if you get a natural expansion then you're like super far ahead. Like if there are no abilities and the units are like linear, then you can kind of expect, well, this guy's army is going to beat that one, and he's going to win. Like, so I think something
Yeah.
like that can be interesting is abilities or some sort of way to let the other guy get
Hmm.
ahead again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean that in that case, you want to have different, like completely different designs for the factions, and
Mm-hmm.
that's also something I actually noted down that eh, like if you have, for example, a faction that is weak in the early game, meaning let's say the first 5 minutes of the match, then your target is to kind of survive for those 5 minutes, and then maybe you are at a disadvantage, but
Mm-hmm.
because your units are stronger after those 5 minutes than the units that the other player has, then you can then you can turn around the game, kind of like you can you start with a disadvantage, but if uh, you kind of get an advantage from having stronger units or something. So in that case, you might have an economic disadvantage, but if it comes to battles, then maybe you are stronger than the other guy,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other player needs to react because he knows, yeah, I can't, I shouldn't fight big battles with my whole army. I should maybe spread out and like uh, attack from multiple directions and cripple the other player that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that way you have like different strategies, and I think um, I think as a player that's an important thing as a mindset, that if you want to actually get good, or I think maybe get to understand the a strategy game as good as possible. So I mean, if you understand it well, then you probably have more fun because you can think about more stuff to do. Um, is it's that you kind of want to see what works and how greedy you can play, so that you know different situations. I mean, with a strategy game, uh, I think no game allows you to see the whole map that is currently on the market. So in that case, you also need to gather information, and then you need to adapt to the information you got,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
and then adapt your strategy. For example, if somebody is rushing you or he's going to rush you, and you see that when you send a unit into his base to get information, uh, that maybe he has like 3 factories and not a lot of like minor units that gather resources. And then you know, I gotta prepare, and I might be at a disadvantage right now, but if I just defend that attack, then I get more resources, and then I got the advantage. So um, I I think in real time strategy games, like I said, it's important to understand the situation and what your units can do or what your buildings can do, to either protect you, or how you maybe can open up somebody that's just turtling in his base and just building a lot of defensive structures. Um, so yeah, I think that's the fun thing as a player, that where you have different play styles and you just need to adapt, and it's kind of like actually learning something, where you need to in the end learn a build order and the timing, where you say, okay, um, if I do this, then I have the highest advantage at 5 minutes and 45 seconds. So I want to attack at this point in time. Um, and I think that's what actually makes a good RTS player, that he or she can actually read the situation that well,
Mm-hmm.
that he can use, like he or she knows that he or she's at an advantage, and that uh, the options are A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm.
Like attacking now, taking another expansion and delaying the game, or maybe camping in front of the base of the other player so he cannot move out. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um,
I think from actually one of the biggest things to understand about a game where you're battling either another player or an AI, like from a developer or a player standpoint, is that ultimately what the player is doing is trying to capitalize on the other player's mistakes. I mean, because you can play, like, let's say you're like one guy is very bad and the other guy is the best player in the game, then yeah, he doesn't really need to capitalize on any mistakes. He can kind of just play like a normal thing, maybe follow like a build order that he usually does, and then he just kills the noob, right? But let's say that there's the best player and his clone, uh, and so they're both like imperfect because they're humans. So basically, what they have to do there is, since they would like in theory play the same exact way, and they'd be able to like spy each other and tell what the other guy's doing and counter it. What they would need to do is capitalize on their like each other's mistakes. So like if one guy accidentally overextends a unit, the other guy can pick it off, and then well now the other guy's wasted resources and the other guy has an army advantage. So so I mean I think ultimately, like as a player, you need to know that you if the other guy's playing perfectly, the only thing you can do, well, okay, if the player's playing very well, the only thing you can do is like act before he acts and like capitalize on some mistake, or maybe like whatever strategy it is, you do whatever strategy that you can when he like the other guy makes more mistakes than you do, basically. So
Yeah.
so it's about like playing as well as you can and making sure that you can capitalize on what the other guy does wrong. And so like from a developer standpoint, since that's the case, like you need to make sure you need to know the consequences of what happens when you add things in. Because let's say both guys are playing the same faction. Like what I said with the abilities, like an ability that's based on skill, for example, like using it correctly, or just army, like if you're able to micro your army correctly, stuff like that is kind of the driving factor. Because if both guys a click in exactly the same army, like then both armies get destroyed in theory, and it's kind of like based on positioning and microing. Because a clicking is kind of like just telling both armies to attack each other. so if there's no micro and no control of the army, then like there's no strategy involved. In that regard, you're kind of just sending the armies at each other. You want to like make them be in the right position. You want to make them attack the right things. And so whatever you add in that can like complement that will either make the game easier or harder. It's like if each individual unit has more abilities, then you have more chances to outplay the other guy, rather than just play based on stats. So if you add like tons of that, then it can kind of turn into a mess that's like not at all based on stats. But if you have too little of them, then it can be only based on stats. So yeah, something to think about there.
Yeah, I think it also depends on how you build the unit interactions. Some games have like hard counters, where you have maybe unit A, and unit A can kill 10 units of unit type B just because it takes less damage from that unit and it does additional damage to that unit type.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that case, I think I'm not a big fan of that type of unit design, because it can be kind of coin flipping, where like I said, RTS are games where both players have imperfect information. So just because you could not find a specific building that builds that unit, you just outright lose because you don't know it's coming. That's, I think, pretty boring and really frustrating as a player, because the other player could be building unit A, B, or C, and then you want to counter unit B, but he's actually building unit A, and unit A is strong against the units you are building to counter unit B, and then you fight, or you try to fight, but you cannot win the battle, and then you just outright lose. That's pretty stupid. some games have that kind of design, but luckily not every game. So something like, for example, StarCraft has like some units are weak, like they are not strong against each other at all. So for example, a Marine, well, it does full damage against a Dragoon, but the Dragoon has much more HP, and the Dragoon does only half damage to a Marine. So kind of both players say, nah, I don't want to take that battle because the Marine has less damage, less HP, and the Dragoon is just kind of wasting DPS shooting the Marine.
Yeah.
So they kind of say, yeah, I'm just going to retreat, and I'm going to attack with more efficient units later on. So stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
is that like
something? Sorry.
Yeah. Does the Dragoon do more damage because the Marine is bio, or is there like a specific like interaction?
No, in StarCraft Brood War, it was that you had 3 different types of armor. You had light, medium, and heavy. And you also had 3 different... Was it 3 different? Attack types. So you had normal attacks, for example, Marines and Marine Zerglings and Zealots. They do kind of normal damage.
Yeah.
They always do 100% damage to everything they attack. And then you have explosive damage. So where it does, I think that was half. No, I think those did full damage to light units, but did reduce damage to everything else. So I think the Vulture had explosive damage.
Okay.
Where it did 20 damage to Marines, but only 5 damage to a Dragoon. So it did only 1/4 of the damage to a Dragoon. And then you had I cannot remember the third attack type's name, but it did half damage to light units and full damage to, I think, everything else. No. So you had kind of like the Dragoon took full damage from... No, I think... it's difficult to explain right now.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so because you have different armor types and different attack types, you have units that kind of soft counter each other. So if you have a Vulture attacking a Dragoon, then because it does only 1/4 of the damage that it usually would do, it's not very strong. But yeah, I think the Dragoon also didn't do full damage against it. So like, yeah, you have this Marine Dragoon interaction again, where like both players just want to kind of space each other and and then call it quits, kind of, where they don't want to be attacking each other.
And that's so are you saying that was bad or good? Or
I think that was actually I think that's actually good design, because in that way you have units that might seem strong against a different unit, but because of the armor type, or maybe because of the damage type of one of the units, it's not like 2-shotting or 3-shotting that unit. So like the Dragoon is kind of invincible against Vultures, but uh, vultures are cheaper and they don't take full damage. So yeah, they you might just pick off a few dragoons or just shoot a bit and then run again or something like that. So you have um, pretty cool interactions between all the units. Or, for example, the High Templar, it does not have any attack actually. It can only attack by using Psystorm, so an ability that does area of effect damage. But it's one of the strongest units in the game, so yeah, it does not attack directly, but because of that spell, it's actually very useful. And that way, like we talked about units feeling different, and in this case, because of the different damage types and armor types, every unit actually feels different or has a different purpose, I think.
Yeah, it actually seems like a good way of balancing it because like you said before, with where like one unit will specifically do less damage to another unit, that seems like a very like lazy design. Because with the kind of design that you were describing in StarCraft, where like there's different like armor and damage types that do different things to each other, it kind of gives the player like a system that they can tell, like they can understand, like you can use intuition and say, oh, okay, well this unit's obviously not good against that one because damage type and armor type, etc.
Yeah.
But then like with something, and then from like a developer standpoint, like you now have like your ground set out where you say, okay, these are our types. Now we can like design factions to interact with each other in like a balanced way based on these, rather than having to like say, okay, this unit does 10% less damage to that unit, and then you have like a string of like 10 different interactions between units, and that's kind of like it's just something hard to keep track of. Whereas when you have like specifically like say 10 passive abilities that will do that, like are a different interaction with a different unit, it's just like memorization versus intuition, and I think that's kind of like that can be very annoying. Whereas like with the damage types, you can clearly tell like what's going to happen based on like just figuring it out. So
yeah, just as a bad example or something I did not like about StarCraft 2 was that they kind of used damage types or armor types kind of artificially. So, for example, let's say maybe Ultralisks were too strong. Then Blizzard just added a massive armor type. So suddenly a few units did extra damage because the Ultralisk had the massive unit type. And so I think they did the same thing for several units where it's like they are adding a specific unit attribute just so a different unit can counter it completely. So if something is too strong, then they, for example, let's say the Dragoon was too strong in Brood War, then they kind of said, yeah, okay, then Marines do like 1.5 times the damage because they have they do extra damage against 4-legged units. Something like that. So something really artificial.
Yeah.
And maybe something like only the Dragoon actually has that armor type, which would be kind of stupid.
Yeah,
because then it's just like screaming, hey, yo, you should use the Marine to kill the Dragoon, So...
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think that can work, but like I think ultimately you expect, like, I mean, me as a player, I expect that kind of thing is a basis of the game where it's like not really added unless it's a huge update where where like multiple units are now like interacting with this armor type or damage type, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I could see why they do that, but like I think I'd be more in favor in general of like just changing stats, if it's not going to be applied widely. I mean, unless
Yeah.
unless the game is like horrible and they and like this is the best way that they've like determined uh, for like making the
How
game
it can
better,
be
then
fixed.
yeah, exactly. I mean, then obviously then that's fine. But if it can be fixed in a more interesting way, then yeah, probably
Mm.
should be.
Yeah. Okay. So, because we already talked about uh 45 minutes, let me just finish my notes
Yeah.
on like the player side.
Uh-huh.
Then we can talk about a few examples, I guess. I mean, you kind of already explained about like the balancing unit design, how you should kind of uh, design the gameplay of an RTS. So just something for players actually listening to the podcast. For me, I as a player, I think RTS have three different skills. So, uh, or as a player, you have like three different skills, like the strategical, the reading, and the mechanical skill. So, for example, strategical skill would be like coming up with funky strategies to use stuff to your advantage or like weaknesses of the opponent. Reading is actually like understanding the current state of the game. Um, like you see buildings and units, and then you know, okay, that's what the enemy is doing. And then mechanical skill, like you explained, would be just building and controlling units. And different games, different RTS games, kind of they kind of reward different kinds of skill more or less.
Yeah, exactly.
So for example, StarCraft Brood War is heavily in favor of mechanical skill, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Then probably reading, because in most matches you use uh, a few units and you can win through that. But if both players are on the same level, kind of, then it's also a strategical thing. So yeah, the other guy never rushes, so you can play really greedy and stuff like that. So I think you can kind of say, okay, you need these three skills as a player to be really good, and of course, a good player will combine everything in one package where he has good strategies and he can adapt the strategy well to what the other player is doing. And he never forgets to build new units, or like he can control the huge army of units he actually built in the game. But of course, kind of every player has some weakness. In that case, you can kind of circumvent it by knowing your weakness, where you say, okay, I'm too stupid to move 200 units in the late game, so you want to have a strategy that ends in the mid game.
Mm-hmm.
But as a player, of course, it gets predictable if you always try to, let's say, end the game at 20 minutes into the game.
Yeah.
Then if you have a tournament setting, for example, probably interested players will join several tournaments, so they will know you and you will know the other player at some point. And so in this case, you will probably fall behind other players if you don't work on your weaknesses. Or, well, you just choose a game that just heavily favors what you're really strong at. So if you're good at let's say building units and controlling units, uh, and you're bad at thinking of new strategies, then you would pick a game where it's all about getting out units fast and controlling the units and just winning through that, or where you can just copy strategies really easily from other players, and so you don't have to actually think up stuff like counters to strategies yourself, because you can just copycat everything.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way of thinking of it. I think the three strategies or these types of skill. I actually never thought of it that way, but it's true. Yeah, I mean, you have to know what's going on. You have to be able to control your units correctly, and you have to what's it called? I've already forgotten. Mechanical skill. You said reading and what else did you say?
Strategies.
Yeah,
so you like kind of planning before the match actually begins, then like planning while the game is playing out, and then execution in the game.
Yeah, because you have to know how to change what you're doing, because it's definitely not going to work out how you plan, but the whole point of it is to have a base of what to do.
Yeah, exactly. And so also from my player perspective, I mean, not everything is all rosy with RTS games. You have some factors that might make people lose interest in the game, and that would be like frustration. For example, even if you have the same level as the other player, but it's really frustrating to actually move units or to do something in the game. Like you have a battle, and maybe you think, nah, I want to run away and restructure my army, but it's kind of impossible. Then it's really frustrating because you don't have you want to do something, but it cannot work because the game doesn't let you. Else something else that might be frustrating is kind of learning a game from zero, where you don't have resources where you can learn things from. So where you start playing the game, and then you are at that in that situation where you want to say, what is that unit actually useful for? What is it strong at? But if there are no resources, like then it's also kind of frustrating, or you feel kind of like left alone in the dark. And then so a pretty normal problem is that a game doesn't have enough players, where you want to play, maybe you're looking for a game to play online, but there's nobody online at that time frame, or maybe the game is just not popular in your area. Then you kind of say, okay, I would like to play, but there's no way I can play because there's nobody left, kind of.
Yeah, that's basically me with Grey Goo. There's nobody playing it except for like very, very seldom. Yeah.
And I guess something that's kind of same-ish as not enough players is not enough challenges. So, for example, tournaments, at least for me as a player, I was like, my motivation of playing online was playing clan war tournaments, or like one-on-one tournaments, so as an individual player. So if you don't have something like tournaments, then I guess the game also feels kind of like, what's the point? What's the point as a player to play a game competitively where there's no competition, kind of?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's also, I also find that my driving factor is to play like competitively. I never did anything like a clan war, but I did always like to play like 1v1s and stuff like that in competitive, because like that's what I consider to be like the main game, and is like the competitive play version.
Mm.
For me, obviously, I know I understand that other people might only care about campaign. Like that's like for me actually with games like Homeworld, the main game is single player. Like I don't really think of Homeworld as a multiplayer game, but something like StarCraft, it's like for sure for me that's like the main game is like 1v1 ladder or scrims or whatever clan wars tournaments.
Mm.
But yeah, I think it really depends on who the player is.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, if you just want to play single player, then I guess not being able to control units is also kind of frustrating. So some some points that are frustrating in multiplayer are also frustrating in single player, but
Mm-hmm.
probably because it's not a good game experience in general. So if it's not good when playing the game in single player, then of course it's probably not a good experience when playing online against a different player.
Yeah, I think for me there are like three main like design concepts of RTS, and I think it's like I think one it needs to have a really good user experience. So like doing anything needs to not be annoying, as you said. Like everything should be accessible and easy to press. And in my opinion, I think you should be able to hotkey everything. Um, and with so yeah, that's like user experience is like one main point, and then for the other two are it needs to be challenging, but it needs to be easy to get into. So you should have players at different skill levels who are challenged by other players at the same skill levels as them. But they should be able to improve without like having a bad experience, and that kind of like leaks over with the user experience, because if there's a bad user experience, then getting better is a horrible experience. So like stuff, the ability to get better needs to be well presented, so a player can easily figure out what they're doing wrong and how to get better. And they should also not be like obstructed by the game to actually like play the game. So there should be, like we said, that kind of experience where everything is easy to get to and it doesn't take too long to understand how to get to the stuff. Like
Hmm.
like I mean, like with StarCraft, you don't everything is kind of expected. Like you can click on buildings to upgrade things like evolution chambers. You can click on units to use their abilities, and all the units are going to be inside of the selection bar. And there's a mini map, so like everything is kind of clear and follows the same, I guess, framework of how you actually do stuff. So a player is able to understand, what how to do the next thing but better, right? So like maybe you never get to late game, and so you never build like, let's say in StarCraft 2, you never really build the infestation chamber, but you'll still understand how to build it, because I mean you just upgrade Hive, and then you can build an infestation chamber, and then you can upgrade things in the infestation chamber. So it's like, it follows the same framework, and you can easily know what to do next. Um, and just the factor of challenging, I think, is really just based on, I guess, how the game is balanced. Because, like we said, if it's just a game where you throw an army at a different guy, then it's like really boring and stale gameplay.
Hmm.
Like that's where I think the challenging factor comes in, is having to use different strategies to like do well in the game. So some things need to be easy enough to do, so that like most players are going to do them, but then other stuff needs to be having a higher skill cap, I think. So like using abilities effectively, capitalizing on a guy's mistakes, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think those are like the main three, I guess, pillars of RTS in my opinion. But
Hmm.
I don't know. Just what
Yeah, I
just
guess
what I know.
at least stuff that you can kind of influence as a developer as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think because yeah, like we said, if it doesn't feel good to play, then yeah, the game won't be successful
And it's a bad game. Yeah.
neither in single player or multiplayer, I think.
Yeah.
So shall we continue on talking about a few examples?
Sure. Yeah, we can spend like 5 minutes maybe, like talking about stuff.
Yeah, okay. So we talked about StarCraft 1 and we talked about StarCraft 2. So both are Blizzard games. Just to throw in another Blizzard game is Warcraft 3, which is also an RTS, but kind of hero focused. So where it's more about controlling one unit really well, or taking care of the hero unit and powering it up instead of the normal army units. Like items are really important, and so yeah, it's more like everything revolves kind of around hero units because they are so strong. But so I didn't like the multiplayer experience because I thought, yeah, I don't like to pamper a hero unit all game. But in the single player campaign, it was really good because the unit kept its experience level and everything was like fitting together. So you end mission 1 and then mission 2 starts from where mission 1 ended, or maybe a bit of time passes and then mission 2 starts, but it's the same place, or something happened and then it continues on. So everything is one storyline that fits together. So for me, it was a really good single play experience. It was fun to play, but like in that case, I didn't really like the multiplayer gameplay. So that would be a good single play example, at least for me.
Okay. So yeah, I guess some back and forth examples. Let me think. What do I talk about? I feel like I talk about like subcommon machines like all the time in StarCraft. So I think I'll say one of the more recent games that I liked was Homeworld Deserts of Karak. And it's one of the games where nobody is really playing multiplayer, so I never played a multiplayer match. But I had a really good experience playing the single player. Like, it was like oftentimes when I play an RTS single player, I don't really feel immersed in it. StarCraft 2 was pretty immersive, and I think Deserts of Karak also was, because it had like you would finish a mission and you'd learn something new about the story, and you'd actually be playing out a scenario that's related to the story, and not just kind of doing a cookie cutter campaign. So and so like you get introduced new units and have this kind of progression aspect where like it'll bring a unit and it'll say use this unit in this way, but it won't tell you everything to do. Like for example, there's some units that can toss a smoke screen, and it's not going to flat out tell you use the smoke screen in this scenario, this scenario, and this scenario. It'll just say this is what the smoke screen does, and maybe it'll present like one situation where you can do it. But then in the future, like you have to know when to use it. Like for example, if you're good with the mechanics, you'll want to toss the smoke screen like behind light assault vehicles, but in front of railguns. That way, like your armored assault vehicles can easily destroy the small guys and not get attacked by snipers. So I mean, it had like good RTS balance, but it was kind of simplistic, but it was easy to understand and pretty fun to play. And like like I said, the story was interesting and fun to go through. So I would recommend that game.
For me, I kind of live in the past, so I guess the last game I really played kind of competitively, even recently, was Earth 2160, and the normal game is pretty shit. The story, like the single player story, is kind of generic, and yeah, at least everything fits together, so it's one storyline, so that's good. But it kind of feels generic, and yeah, like you know what's gonna happen if you know which factions are in the game. And multiplayer, I mean, they tried to balance the game with balance patches, but in the end, the game was still really, really broken. where you had kind of units. If you didn't have like a shield, then a few units, like a beam, would jump from unit to unit, and instead of decreasing in damage, it would increase. And like only the shield could could protect you from this electric damage well. So if you didn't have the shield, then if the other guy just built a lot of those units, they would kind of pop your whole army. So yeah, in that case, even if you built new units, they would just die straight away. Especially the more units you have, the faster they die, because the beam is jumping, right? Yeah, so that was pretty stupid. So the game was kind of full with not overpowered. I wouldn't say overpowered, because there are counters, but you got so many resources really quickly. So it felt like resources didn't play a big factor in the game, except of running out of it if your base ran dry.
Yeah.
Else it was just get 20 factories, 6 labs, research everything at the same time, spam units, click them because they die too quickly. So like there was no strategy involved. It was just like, yeah, that race has a lot of chemical damage units, so I equip anti-chemical armor, and I know, well, maybe your race has a lot of explosive damage, so maybe you say, yeah, I'm gonna go for chemical damage myself. Maybe you got 1 or 2 units that can do that, to be unpredictable, but else, like, the later you got in the game, the less options you had for damage. And so in that case, it was really predictable, because the other guy would also research a better armor for, like, let's say, explosive damage. So you countered his composition because you get anti-chemical armor, and he got anti-explosive armor. And then neither you or the other player do a lot of damage. It's just stupid, because the better you know the game, the more predictable it gets what the other guy is gonna do. And so both players counter each other, and somehow you need to play wonky, like you need to play something really different to actually kind of get an advantage. So it's so predictable that you are forced to play unpredictable. Yeah. So, and yeah, that you couldn't control units well, because there was like the standard unit behavior was follow enemy units and attacking. So even if you click away, tell them to move away, they would go into follow and attack again. So they just turn around for a moment and then turn around, and you would need to adjust it for every unit. So that you built. So it was like, oh yeah, I group a new unit, so yeah, then I need to change that again.
I guess they kind of do that in machines too, right? They'll get aggroed as soon as they see a guy. I mean, okay. Yeah, can you can you group hold ground or something like that?
In Earth, you can do that, but that would be kind of stupid, because if you get attacked, then of course you want the other units to also attack, right? To have a higher DPS. Else the other guy's just gonna pick off every unit one by one.
Yeah.
Of course you can set them to not follow but attack.
Yeah.
So but you need to pay a lot of attention to your army in that game.
Okay.
Else, you got a different example. So that was one of the not so good examples.
Yeah, I have an example actually I liked a lot. I thought, I think it's actually the best faction design in my opinion, where the factions are actually like very different, but I believe they're balanced. Not sure though. I think they're balanced for the most part. The game was called Universe at War Earth Assault, and I think it came out somewhere between 2004 and 2007. Don't remember the exact year. And unfortunately, its multiplayer was like destroyed by Microsoft's horrible Games for Windows Live, which is, I believe, thankfully discontinued. And it like messed up the matchmaking completely. It had a bunch of like open NAT issues and stuff like that, where it was difficult to join games without having problems. Um, but if you could join a game, it wouldn't lag. Like it did play well.
Hmm.
So what I thought was great about it was there were three different factions, and unlike StarCraft, I actually enjoyed playing all three of them. In StarCraft, I cannot stand playing Protoss. Sorry, Protoss players.
Yeah, I feel the same. Protoss
Yeah.
is
Um,
bad.
yeah. So the three factions basically. I'll say them quickly. One of them had basically mobile buildings, which were also super weapons. They were called walkers, and you could build hardpoints on them, either factories or cannons. And there were these giant, like beings, like they say. I guess they were cyborg-like things, and they could like step on buildings, and they just basically moved very slow, but you could use them to assault and build units at the same time. The downside is like that faction doesn't have any like stationary buildings. It's basically just walkers and turrets. Uh, and so that faction has very big like strong units for the most part. Um, and they like don't take it. They have like more health and more damage than the other ones. Uh, and so yeah, their concept was like you'd send a walker in, you'd build units on the way, and then you'd basically have a bunch of juggernauts destroying shit. Um, and then there was also Novus, which was a faction of all robots. And Novus was kind of like um, basically you built a lot more units, and they were more expendable for the most part. So you could like send in. There was this unit called the Ohmbot, and you could send in tons of them and just have them all suicide, and then build more if you were in the resource lead, because there were you could build. You would require power, kind of like pylons as Protoss. And then you could build flow conduits next to the power, which would let your units teleport through this kind of network, and like get to places like so much faster, like than walking. It's almost instant. And so you could kind of like build an army fast, and then go and send them and to do something like be expendable, and like maybe take down a walker by blowing up all of its hard points by suiciding. And so finally, the last faction was called. They were called Masari, I think. And they were kind of they were this faction with a dark mode and a light mode. And so light mode was more damage based, and dark mode was more defense based. So like you could put on a damage barrier on all your buildings if you researched that tech, for example, and you were in dark mode. But in light mode, you could get burning damage. So like when your units shoot guys, then they'll like damage them over time, for example. And it did more
Hmm.
stuff. Like there was a super weapon that would change depending on if it was dark or light, and stuff like that. Um, and so that was kind of they were kind of a balance between the other two factions, where their units were kind of like medium sized, but they could be really really strong armies if you played it right. It just took more skill than the other two, I think. Um, but yeah, what I liked about that game was that the factions, they all had like different features, but they were all fun to play. I guess if if you like all their different play styles.
Hmm.
Um, and I really actually I think that's actually my favorite single player as well. I don't know, maybe
Hmm.
it's my favorite like RTS game even. I guess I mean it was just really I felt really well rounded. And I thought the single player had a good story. It was fun to play. None of the campaigns were really stale. Um, and yeah, no, it was just fun to play. So I mean, I definitely recommend checking it out. But you're definitely not going to get into any multiplayer matches now if you were to play it. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, before we wrap up, I just want to mention some games that are a bit that might be a bit boring to play
Mm-hmm.
as strategy games. They are mostly old games, but
Mm-hmm.
for example, the old Command and Conquer games. You mentioned Command and Conquer earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and they most like until Red Alert 2, they were mostly spamming tanks.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just like getting resources and spamming tanks and then fighting and then game over. Uh, KKND 2 was also, I think, more of a single player game. I know some people played multiplayer or like playing multiplayer, but yeah, I think all three races are kind of same-ish.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and yeah, so doesn't really matter too much which faction you play. Just the stats are a bit different, and I guess uh, we talked about Duck Colony, I think, in the
Mm-hmm.
past,
Yeah, we did.
and that's just copying units to a different faction with a different like it just looks different, but
Uh-huh.
everything is really the same.
Gotcha.
They play exactly the same, and actually a good copycat game is actually Atrox, a Korean StarCraft 1 clone,
Mm-hmm.
where they kind of copied the mechanics of the races in StarCraft, but they switched around the abilities and how units worked, or how the like how the factions played. So uh, I think the pylon power thing actually was switched to the human race,
Mm-hmm.
so kind of like Terrans. Uh, and like the Zerg race was not weak and mass units, but they kind of had both, like some small units and some really strong
Uh-huh.
units that just stomped the other units of the other races. That was actually fun to play, at least for me, because I knew StarCraft, and so it was kind of in just it felt familiar,
Mm-hmm.
but as a different experience, and so I actually enjoyed it, and for me it's the real StarCraft 2.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll probably check that out at some point.
yeah, it's yeah, I guess that's it for old games. Maybe you should not be playing, or maybe you should give a try, but maybe also see the faults. I mean, some are cult classics, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean they are still good games, I think.
Yeah. I think actually, you know what? I'm gonna do some honorable mentions from when I was like a kid. There was Dark Rain. That was pretty fun, but I didn't know too much about it because I was very young. Then there was StarCraft or Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds Saga. I think that's what it was called. Some really weird long name. And that was, oh man, that was fun. There was like 10 factions. There were so many factions. And I played the what was it? Some Battle Federation or something. Basically, the guys that made droids. And so you could build droidicas, and you could mass the droid guys with the weird nasal voices. Um, and they were pretty fun. Um, so yeah, those were two different ones. They were both 2D, and I played them when I was super young. They were also very fun. They had good. I know that the Star Wars one had a really good map editor. Um, and so after that, I guess there was Machines, um, and then there was, which is yeah, basically had the FPS mechanic and one faction with like medium kind of units. Actually, they went from small to very large, so that was like had a lot of different features. I think I guess. Um, And then the other one, yeah, I think probably the last one before I like stop is both of the Lord of the Rings ones. I don't know if you ever played those, but it was the Battle for Middle Earth ones. There was 1 and 2, and I liked 2 a lot, but it was imbalanced as hell. So, so yeah, the elves were basically broken because they had like the highest damage and AOE. So that was pretty stupid, but but the game was interesting. Like all the factions played differently, and they had different abilities that you could like cast. Like Isengard had this lightning chain ability and stuff like that. So they were pretty fun to play. But yeah, that's all the ones that are older that I can think of. I think the rest of them you probably know. So
Okay. Yeah, I have not played any Lord of the Rings games, but I think I watched the tournament for What is it? Battle for Middle Earth
Yeah.
1
yeah,
on German television, but I think that's it. I think I only read that Battle for Middle Earth 2 was kind of worse. So
I don't know. I mean, the balance was probably worse, but I like that game a lot more. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, to each their own, I
Yeah.
guess. So, so then let's wrap up for this week. I hope we got you interested in trying out some RTS games, older or newer. Else, I hope I could actually tell people that are interested in playing RTS how to kind of approach them.
Mhm.
It can be really fun to approach a game that nobody really knows how to play, to think about everything from strategies to timings to just mechanical skill, how you can improve everything. I think that's also a good experience when you learn a game that's played by more people. And yeah, I guess you also told our listeners a lot about how you can actually make the game better to play, or what to keep in mind when, for example, designing factions or even just units, or maybe unit interactions, how they control, etc. So from a developer perspective, I hope people that are interested in developing RTS games also like keep in mind what is important to make a good RTS game that is fun to play for the users.
Yeah.
And
No
I think that's the most important thing, to actually keep it alive. To like, you need to have a good single player story. So make it fun to play and not really stale, like we talked about. Not just kill everything missions. And in multiplayer, yeah, everything just needs to feel different if you pick a different race, and just don't make it too imbalanced. And I think then it should be fine.
Yeah, we need to make a petition. It's like no more bad RTS, no more boring RTS games. Just actually design the balance before making the damn thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So that was episode 14 for this week, and yeah, we don't know which genre we are going to talk about next week. So it's a prize for you and for us. So I hope you tune in next week again, and if you want to talk about anything related to RTS, then let us know. Maybe if we forgot to talk about something, then just let us know in the comments, and then yeah, I hope you tune in next week again, and have a nice week.